Hi guys, welcome to our panel with ScreenCloud. Life without Agile, mission to build better software. So I don't know about you, but Agile is what I've always known in terms of creating new features and how to manage them. And the guys at ScreenCloud seem to have some different opinions. So I'm excited to ask them some questions. We'll hopefully have time for Q&A at the end. And do you guys want to do a brief intro to who you both are? And then maybe, Jonny, you can do the intro to ScreenCloud and tell us what is it all about in Belfast.
Sounds good. So yeah, I can do a quick intro. So I'm Michael Martin. I'm the site lead and director of engineering here in Belfast.
And I'm Jonny Kirk. So I'm one of the product managers, again, here in Belfast. And ScreenCloud. So what do? So ScreenCloud, we help businesses, other organizations connect, engage with their employees or with their customers or with their members using screens, these things that are everywhere. And so I'll give you a kind of brief overview of what that really means. So it means we work with a business to connect the content they've already got. So that might be, on an intranet, or it might be in a POS system for a retail business, or it could be in the likes of Power BI, it could be dashboards, it could be all kinds of content that they have. We connect that content to the users by helping them put it onto the screens that are all over the place. So examples of that could be, the three key sectors we look at are the deskless worker. So people working in a factory maybe have production information on one screen. They maybe have health and safety and this many days since the last accident on another screen. And then they've maybe got some interesting information about what the company is doing for their well-being, what courses are running, all kinds of internal information. And that's all, as I say, on screens. We're based all over the world. We have our sales and marketing team in Los Angeles. We have our people team and accounts and some more salespeople in London. And then our product and engineering hubs are in Bangkok and Belfast. So that's us.
Amazing. So tell us, ScreenCloud, it's a big global operation, but what does Belfast do? You build all of the apps internally?
Yeah. So actually, do you know what? I'll maybe let Michael talk about apps.
Yes, and you can jump into, what is it you build and what is the process?
Sure. No, sounds good. So what we build here very much in Belfast, and what we're using the shape-up methodology I'm going to talk about is for the apps. So the apps you can just think of as all the content on screen. It's very much if Apple was building iOS, like the iOS part's done there, we're building the App Store on top. So it's the Facebook you go and install, the Twitter, the Instagram, like all the features Jonny's been talking about. So on how we do that, that's kind of the change here. The first thing maybe starting with that is you kind of think on what's Agile? That's what everyone knows, and it's the thing that everyone's kind of got the common version of will be you probably do 2-week sprints. You probably have a big backlog of features. You probably estimate them somehow, story points, whatever it is, and probably a demo at the end. That kind of at the end of 2 weeks, what you create. And everyone has a slight variation of that, but that's very much how most of the world makes software. So that was my background as well. That was how we defaulted. Where we started to then look at what other options do you have is what I find is with that, it's very easy to do a long project, come off it after a year, and you kind of how you've had that break before the next thing starts, and you're like, wait, why didn't we just do this totally differently 6 months ago, or why didn't we put the time into this DevOps thing, or deprioritize this feature when we realized it was going on too long? And it's because you go sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint, and there's no real time to pause. By the time you do your retro, the next sprint's already started. And that's really what drove us to looking at what are alternative options. So with ShapeUp, to kind of give a quick overview before we'll talk about pros and cons a wee bit more, I think, but the high level view of ShapeUp is you run 2 tracks. So you have a couple of people who are looking at discovery. What's the next what's the product feedback? What are the customers saying? This is where Jonny's going to be he'll go into the detail on how that works. But that's really thinking about what do we build? And then when it comes to actually building it, what you'll put together is the idea of a pitch. You're saying, here's an idea I think is worth making. Here's some details about it. Here's why. But before we commit to doing anything, you're then going to have what we call a betting table, or what ShapeUp calls a betting table, where we literally decide, right, 6 pitches, we can only build 3 of them, which 3 is it going to be? You get this sign off once. Once you've picked that we're going to do one of these products, you then take a 6-week phase to build it. And what we're saying is, like, that's 6 weeks. We're not going to change anything. The team is going to, they know their pitch, they know the rough problem. It's not fully defined. There isn't a backlog of features. You're not going to do like a story point estimates or plan and poker or all those things. You've got 6 weeks, a chunky bit of time. You can kind of do something that's meaty, that's difficult, but you can ship by the end of it without doing a smoke and mirrors demo. You know, it needs to be a real thing. And then after that, you take a 2-week cooldown. So then that's that break I was kind of saying about, where you can, after a month and a half, like, what was good about the last month and a half? What wasn't? 2 weeks is a good enough time to actually go and do something about that. Maybe some tech debts, maybe some small feature, and then you just do the next one. And really, that flow of like 6 weeks, 2-week break, 6 weeks, 2-week break, that's the biggest change.
And so Agile versus ShapeUp, give us a typical example of how you guys would go about building a new feature. Right. So we're familiar with how you would do that with Agile, but with ShapeUp, Jonny, how would you go about building a new feature?
Well, actually, I'm going to do something very predictable for a product manager and say, well, it doesn't start with that at all. And that's not at all controversial to say that we don't start with a feature. It's probably slightly more controversial to say we also don't start with a customer.
Oh.
And I think what's really nice about ShapeUp, which I'll come back to, is that it is flexible enough and gives you enough space to do all the other stuff that we should be doing as product management teams, which often gets overlooked in the just rigorous sprint. So what I mean by that, for example, is rather than starting with the feature or, in fact, the customer, we're going right back to say, well, what is the business outcome? So consistently keeping a business outcome in mind, because how we shape and how we decide what to build varies massively depending on whether you're trying to test for product market fit, or whether you're trying to actually blow a competitor out of the water, or whether you're trying to focus on maximizing profit in a particular sector, or whether you're saying, look, we need to get X amount of market share to make it viable. You've got to have that business outcome in place. And then beyond that, you still don't go to the customer. Then at that point, you're saying, well, what's the product outcomes? What are the product outcomes that we know from experience, or we can research from the market that we know will drive that business outcome? And then we get to the customer.
So that is quite a long process compared to what I would know Agile to be, which is quite customer-led, you know, and probably even sales team kind of waiting in there, and, you know, customers coming at salespeople coming at the product team. And actually, what you're saying is you need to have that business outcome high on the priority list. Like, what is it that the business wants to achieve in the next quarter? What are the business objectives? And then come down into what does the product need to be to deliver those business objectives? Okay.
Which then means when you're actually talking to the customers, you can assess and say, well, look, we've got these 16 different customer desires or needs or opportunities. And you can, instead of saying, should we do this or not, the question is, which one of these will help us achieve our product outcomes and in turn help us achieve the business outcome? So then it means you're constantly comparing, you're looking. But the key here is we have to now address a customer need. So it's still customer-centric because you're focusing on, well, the next thing we're going to do will address these customer needs. And we're confident, and we will measure, we're confident that that will drive our product outcome and our business outcome.
Can I put you on the spot? Unrehearsed question here. Can you give me an example of how that would work in terms of, say, for example, an Agile sprint would come at a customer need and how ShapeUp would come at a customer need? Now, you're saying it's still customer-centric. So can you give me an example of how that business outcome stays at the top of your priority list?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear as well, what I'm describing is not strictly ShapeUp. It's the product management things that often don't get done because there's not space for them. ShapeUp provides that space and provides that opportunity to say, okay, we know what we're doing in this cycle. Now we can shift our focus again for a little bit of time and look at these important things. So how it actually works, we at ScreenCloud have recently been focusing on one particular process that helps that, which is an opportunity solution tree, which means that when you come to me as one of our sales team and say this client is talking about this, we've already mapped out what these opportunities, these customer needs are. If your customer need meets our product outcome and our business outcome better than the ones we were focusing on, then okay, we can fit that in. If it doesn't, then well, sorry, we'll keep it onto this constant comparison. So it is about the fact that when you have a conversation with a customer, which is important to do weekly, constant, you can feeder that back in so that you're always in a position to identify how important it is, whether it's valuable, whether it does achieve, rather than having this constant backlog of people saying, can you estimate this for me so that we can put it into the next sprint 2 down. It gives you that space to achieve that.
Maybe just one thing would add onto that. At a very tactical level, one thing you'll find missing in terms of managing those is there isn't a product backlog with ShapeUp. So very much any version of Agile, you regularly, I'm sure, prune that gigantic backlog, and it's quite a process. And it's very good for doing those sort of like small requests, things that are like, hey, yeah, we can do this in 3-4 days. What we find with the ShapeUp setup is you're doing a full pitch. It'll zoom you out to that bigger picture. So like instead of going down to, we could tweak this, another feature here, we can give another way to change a bit of UI. It's more, I'm thinking about 6 weeks by default. So I'm going to think of something much bigger, and then you have to do that betting table every time. So a wee bit of that same idea that if something didn't get picked, or if you got most of a project done but not the last couple of features, it doesn't default to run in. There's no backlog that's maintained to the next one that's going to just by default end up your time going into it. You're going to be very deliberate about the next 6 weeks. Well, we pitched again. It's very much this is still the right thing. That's kind of where I see the tactics being quite different or day to day.
I mean, it really makes sense from as you talk about the backlog of features. I think we're all, if you've been in the product world for any length of time, you're familiar with this backlog. And, in any business process, there's a backlog. No matter what you're doing, sales, marketing, process, operations, finance, you're going to have that backlog. And quite often what we find at ESTHER is that you put stuff in the backlog and then you can't remember exactly where it came from, right? I think that was a customer request. There should have been a ticket with a story behind it. Somebody didn't put it in. And you end up with this icebox of features that you're not entirely sure how qualified they are. And I like this idea of this opportunity tree where you can bring something in but keep it within this landscape of the businesses moving forward. We have objectives, and still have that space and time to consider things in a fresh way. Am I beginning to get your language here? Is this?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And sometimes it doesn't fit your tree, and you're saying, do you know what? We hadn't even thought of that. That's awesome. That actually, what outcome would that drive? Because we never want to get away from the fact that most of the best ideas are when we discover customers using a product in a way we didn't think, and we think, oh yeah, actually, we could build that. Instead of hacking that around, and you can then test it against your other solutions. So sometimes it doesn't fit your tree, but you get to say, actually, there's a better outcome here than we'd seen. So.
Wonderful stuff. Tell me about your team and the shape of your team compared to what people would be familiar with an agile sprint and the whole icebox of features, etc. Tell me about what does ShapeUp feel like? How is your team structured around that? Over to you, Michael.
Sounds good. Because I think at that world you're getting into, when you do that crossover, so the going into we've picked this and we're going to build it, that's very much into the delivery world. So that'll be that sort of handover from where a product manager has done the shaping, the pitch, the problems right. You then have, you're going to start your 6 weeks, and that to do that, again, if I'm kind of flip to the biggest challenge you'll find with the 6 weeks is you're not going to see, you shouldn't be looking into that team too much during it. It's kind of the words that you see a lot is empowerment and autonomy, and every company talks about how do you give autonomy to a team and give them the ability. ShapeUp kind of it only works if they really have that ability, because in the 6 weeks, you're not going to get a demo in 10 days. You're not going to have there's no burn down chart of these points are on track. You're not really optimizing for, VPs to get reports. It's not for that. You're saying, right, here's a problem. You've got 6 weeks, and we're trusting that you're you know, you're bought in, you've understood it well enough that we haven't even defined what the end result looks like. You know, you guys are going to have to actually figure out, well, how does this layout, what does that feature quite look like? You've kind of given like guidelines or like sort of safety net around it, as to like, we haven't just signed you up to some impossible problem for 6 weeks and, you know, left you hanging. But we also, like, you're not just there to ship feature, or just like read the instructions and like follow through. We're like, you're smart people. Like, we're trusting you to, you know the solution better, people closer to the problem. So the team very much, it reflects that. What we tend to do, we would run with every team would have a designer on the team, because again, the designer's going to sit with the developers and figure out that detail at that point. Like, it's not known up front. There's maybe, usually we think 3 engineers. The team lead would be one of the engineers usually, because it's very much about shipping and delivering. We'd have QA, and quite often like PM, someone who's maybe been involved and can kind of help answer that detail around it. But what you're really looking for then is it's ownership of that problem. Those guys can just like come together. We know how to solve it, and yeah, it's entirely empowerment. It's the whole idea.
And how do you feel that, do you think the shape up methodology allows, as you're saying, more empowerment, more autonomy? Does that go far in terms of confidence and creativity? Do you find mental well-being is better? You know, if you're going from this crunch, deploy, 2 weeks, you know, kind of push, how do the team react to this holistically?
No, it was actually one of the biggest things we found as we went through it, because obviously we didn't know how this was going to go. And at the start, it kind of did feel like it was a longer sprint, you know, because everyone knows Agile, everyone kind of, that was how we worked before. We would have written fairly detailed tickets, and we were probably skewing a bit further that way. Very much, like, confidence was the way to do it. One sort of tactic I started with the team was, we went to these, instead of like, you know, instead of me joining people's stand-ups and stuff, we swapped to doing these sort of weekly catch-ups with the team. And over at the start, that would have been something that was quite tactical. It was very, what do the tickets look like? Do you have the detail? Is your QA going to be blocked? You know, stuff that, anyway, if you've done Kanban or the sort of standard questions. But once people have that wee bit of confidence about, I know how that sort of stuff works, I know how to solve like those small problems, those catch-ups then let people, actually, if we zoom out, the questions you're asking are about, right, we're in week 1 of the cycle. We can do risky stuff. Like, we should be picking the features that scare us. Like, how do we figure out if we're building the right thing? But then when we're in week 4 and week 5, the questions are much more about, okay, so we had to ship in 2 weeks. Like, what does shipping mean? What have we not thought of? What's going to catch us? What features do we need to kill off right now because we shouldn't put more time into them? And I find like those weekly sessions, and it's just a chance for everybody to step back for an hour or two, just to like look at that higher level. You know, as the cycles go on, like in a good way, like I'm much less needed for those, because like people's confidence goes up, and they thought of this. You're coming into the things, and yeah, they're way ahead of you.
So reduce micromanagement, more empowerment, much more creativity, I'm hearing. And guys, okay, you know, you have work to do, right? 6 weeks is a long time. Are you sitting around having coffee? Do you go to the cinema at lunchtime? Like, you know, tell me about how that works. I mean, what are you doing over the 6 weeks?
So, I would say, from a product management point of view, again, product managers, designers very involved in the team. They will often be in the stand-ups at different stages and are very involved. But again, it allows you to do the other things that should be done. So for example, designing how you're going to measure the feature shouldn't happen after you've built the feature. That's part of that phase. Thinking about launch communications. How are we actually going to communicate that out? That's the time that gets planned, that gets done. And this is all work in progress. It's not something that we've mastered, but it allows you the time to think about it. Another one that's right in the forefront of what we're doing at the minute is, how are we going to demo this product, especially as we start working with more third-party software companies. We're thinking, okay, they're building, we're building. At the end of it, we need something that's not just works, but that both sales teams can demo really, really nicely. And it allows the product team to be involved in that. Another really nice thing is that we get to spend a lot of time with customers. And actually, I was just thinking about this morning. One of the colleagues in ScreenCloud who's only joined in the last couple of months in a quite a senior sales executive role, enterprise sales type role. I was in a lot of the customer calls, and he made the comment that in the past roles he's worked in, getting product onto the customer calls has always been difficult. You've always had to have a good reason to have a product manager on the call. But we're different. We're like, we can be on those calls, and actually the only requirement we need is that there's a customer on the other end. You know what I mean? We'll figure it out from there. And so those long cycles where you're not thinking, okay, we need to have user stories written for the middle of next week, to have tech input, there's not that pressure to do that work. That allows you to have the conversations with the customer, to validate, to explore more opportunities, etc.
It sounds to me like what I'm hearing is a lot more cross-pollination of team communication. So with your 6 weeks, you're getting communication, how are we going to demo this, how do we launch this, and it frees your time up then to sit in on customer calls. So you're working with the sales team, you're working with people who are actually trying to market this product. So a lot more communication, better well-being as a company. I'm sure the culture as well really benefits from that. Okay, it all sounds fabulous, right? Perfect, lovely. I'm totally sold. What happens if it all hits the fan, it goes wrong, and you don't get to ship the product, right? Worst case scenario, folks, what do you do in that situation?
Gotcha, yeah. Sadly, it's happened, inevitably. So, well, a couple of things you can do, and a couple of things we did wrong initially. So obviously, 6 weeks, you have a 2-week cooldown afterwards. Very easy to default into going into that cooldown. You've got, it's a buffer, is it? Or is it something you can just kind of run on to? That was what we did initially. And it's not good. You need that, you miss the point of a cooldown, you miss that gap. But if you're over by a day, that's fine. Part of this is your 6 weeks ends on Friday afternoon. You do not need to ship by Friday afternoon. There's no 2 o'clock demo, like we have all better things to be in on Friday afternoon. It can ship on the Monday. And there's a nice little bit of space there. But if it's really, if a project's completely missed, there's a few things. Now, if we get to the end of the 6 weeks, and at that point we find out in that last week, that's actually a sign of our earlier in the process. That was happening in those early days because we weren't realizing that over the 6 weeks, you do treat the rhythm of them slightly differently. You should be thinking, like we started a thing in the last week or two bringing in this idea of like an end game ticket, which is just, how do you finish this? How do you just wrap up whatever's there? What are the must-haves, which could be things to launch, could be content. You should be knowing in advance, is this going to happen? Because for all these projects, the 6 weeks is the fixed amount of time, but we haven't defined the problem. We haven't committed to 100 story points. So you can change the scope at any point. And with the team, kind of what you were saying earlier about confidence, the team knowing 3 weeks in that, no, we can change it. We don't need to go back and get approval from here, or go back to a CEO, or we know what we have to solve. We're going to take things off. And that's how you prevent yourself making those mistakes in future. But if the absolute worst happens, sometimes it does. Sometimes it would be like, we've decided we're going to integrate we do loads with third parties. If one of those third parties just completely drops the ball, some other company, there's nothing we can do that's going to make this project ship. The important thing with Shape Up is, it's kind of in the terminology, you make pitches and you make a bet. And what that bet is saying at the betting table is like, we as a company think it's worth spending a certain amount of time. So say it's the 6 weeks. Like they would call it our appetite. And that's us saying, right, we'll spend 6 weeks in this problem, but we haven't able to spend 10 weeks. Like, we're not defaulting into putting more time into it. So you hit that end of the 6 weeks, and the default response should be, this project stops now. Like, we're not going to carry on. Now, if we think there's a real case for it, great, we're going to pause, re-pitch it. It might be pitching for 3 weeks work in the next cycle. But it makes you all step back and be like, avoid that danger of just, there's one more thing, because we've all been there where it's like, yeah, there's one more, and then there's another door after that, another door after that. It's to stop you kind of going into those kind of like sunk costs and just keeping chasing,
So it's important to take that step back and just refresh, zoom out, look at the business objectives again. And is that what that cooldown's for, Jonny? Talk to me about this concept of cooldown. It's not a buffer for this overflow where you just keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. There's a real purpose for it. Tell me about cooldown. So
cooldown. Now, I'm relatively new to this whole process, and in fact, it's one of the reasons that ScreenCloud appealed to me was, I knew of it, I'd implemented little bits of it, but cooldown is the opportunity for some cool stuff to happen. So, some of our features that aren't on the product roadmap because they're not hitting this business objective, sometimes you have to be able to do stuff that actually is just about exploring, would this work? You know what I mean? So people work on projects. It's not like everyone just takes 2 weeks off. people work on projects that actually they maybe have seen an opportunity that this might work, and we haven't. We don't know if there's a business opportunity for it, but we feel it's worth exploring, and sometimes it is. We feel there's a business opportunity here, and we don't know if we can actually make it happen, so let's explore that. So, and other times it is actually just sitting back and saying, actually, I could have made that better. See that thing back then that we did? I wish I had done it this way, so I want to take a week and change the way we did that, because actually we could improve that. So it's all those kind of things.
And do you feel like with Shape Up, compared to Agile, that with this space, with sort of this cross-pollination between teams, we're talking about the morale, the confidence, the autonomy, and these moments of rest where, it's kind of cooled down, but I really want to tackle that thing in a better way. Do you feel like the overall strength of the product, and when you do deploy, when you do push product live, it comes out in a better way, you have better user engagement? How have you seen that change?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides. Yeah, the culture is a big part of it. It's the burnout. It's just you need a break. You can't do the sprint. And it's like people have little projects that are if you're told what to work on for 6 weeks, you're set a problem, you get a lot of space there. But then in that 2 weeks, if there's something you just have a real pet peeve about, that's sometimes when people do their best work. It's sometimes it's engineers, I'm just sick of the deploy. We're going to fix part of that deploy process. Other times it's UI feature. It could be I don't like how this ended up. Sometimes it's just people just take a notion. One of our apps is a flight schedules. It's people some of the guys just took a notion that was the thing they wanted to build, and they really went to town on the design of it, looking like an old school sort of clicker board you would almost see in an airport. It's something we wouldn't have pitched, but because people wanted to do it, were motivated, and they turned around a really cool thing in 2 weeks. But it's also by working on something you chose and you're actually enjoying working on and proud of, then people are coming out the other end of it really motivated. It wasn't just that we forced this crammed a load of work in. It was a win on both sides. So that's where I've seen the.
I love it, and we're coming in for a landing here, guys. Just for all of you wonderful people who've listened to this fabulous discussion, what advice do you have for anyone interested in learning more, who want to move away from this, Agile sprint into something that's a little more collaborative, creative, with a 6-week framework like Shape Up? What advice have you got for these guys?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose quick problems that we kind of hit. One thing is 6 weeks isn't a magic number. 6 weeks is what Basecamp suggests, so we went with it. It's enough space to do something meaty. But the internal challenge you'll have initially is just the idea of letting a team teams are expensive. The kind of managerial concern will be, how do you leave a team that long? You can do shorter. You can 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It can be smaller. Just same idea, same principles. Taking it slow. So I find figuring that, getting into that notion of how do you break up a problem, but not to the level of someone has to have signed off a full high-spec, high-fidelity design. Someone's written full detailed stories. If you can do a small thing where you're giving people a little more space, a little more trust, and basically building that muscle where people are making those decisions themselves, it kind of grows from there. The pitfall we'd kind of found is, and the thing that's hard is small tasks. The stuff that's actually really easy with something like Scrum or Kanban, where here's a 2-day job. How does that fit in? And great, we put it on that list, roughly somewhere in the backlog. It's going to get done in 10 days from now or whatever. You can quite often you can predict exactly when it's going to get picked up. That's quite hard because you do a 6-week bet. You're not meant to, you don't interrupt the team. You don't come in 3 weeks in and just give them something else. It totally defeats the point. So we find it's quite hard. You might actually, what we do at the minute is we often run one team who more or less work in a more Scrum, they do the 6 weeks, but they're working against a backlog of small tickets. That's kind of been the hardest part, and I don't have a great solution for that one yet, sadly. Those little surprise pieces, it's more about the less of them the better, but you might still just be able to, you don't have to be a purist, basically. You can still take the best parts of Agile and use that.
And Jonny, what would you say, what advice would you give for anyone wanting to implement something like this?
I would say, to me, the advice is take the opportunity to think about what you're doing. I know in many cases people feel like this worked for these people, therefore I will do it that way. And that's why so many of us have spent so long trying very hard to get good at retros or good at X, Y, or Z. And you can be brilliant at it and still deliver an awful product. And so for me, just the idea of thinking about how everything you do affects the outcome, and just pausing to think. So I would say absolutely no one should go into ShapeUp, buy the book because it worked for somebody else. It's a case of thinking what will work for us, being aware of the pitfalls, and actually taking a few steps in that direction.
We do have time for some Q&A. Do we? What time are we supposed to clock?
1:15.
Yeah, we've time for some Q&A. Would anyone like to comment? Any questions? If you are a lover of Agile and you hate everything these guys are saying, please tell us. We would love to hear your thoughts and comments.
No, well, I have questions. But my questions are not for us. My questions are for Carol, right? So we're very, very grateful that Carol has come along and helped us this afternoon.
You're so welcome. My pleasure.
So I thought we would be really good to take a few minutes at the end here and find out about Carol and what Carol is doing and has been up to.
Fabulous.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about ESTHER?
I will. And we'll talk about our product for you product heads there as well. So I am founder and CEO of ESTHER International, and we're a young fintech startup here in Belfast. So what we actually do is provide a platform and prepaid card product for getting donations directly to people who are verified to be in need. So one of the stories I love to tell is walking down the street to work one morning, and I'm in my work gear with my nice shiny handbag and my heels on and my blazer, and I walk past 3 homeless people on the way to work. And typically what I would do is I would walk to the other side of the street, not because I'm a horrible human being, but because I just have no idea how to help. So I'm thinking to myself, if I give this person money, are they going to use it on alcohol and drugs? Is it going to be helpful? Are they going to buy food? And other than that, I don't quite know what to do. So I had this gnawing guilt. Has anyone ever been there with walking down the street? Is it just me? We've got some heads. Good. So I had this real strong feeling of surely there's a better way to empower someone who's in need without me giving them £1, which feels ridiculous, or not giving them anything because I feel guilty. And so I started to think about the charity space at large and think, well, why are we not giving people donations in a safer way than cash? Why can't we use a prepaid card product where we can decide that it can't be spent on alcohol and it can't be spent on anything harmful? And I started to look into the fintech space, and I decided, right, well, no one's doing this. I'm going to go and start a company, which is what we did. And we did a very small pilot. We talked a few charities on board and said, look, we're going to raise some donations. We're going to issue some cards and switch off some high-risk products. Will you let us give people money? And these charities said, sure. We have some refugees that are coming in. They are extremely impoverished and they can't feed their kids. And so that's how it all started. I put a video out on LinkedIn and I said, hey guys, we have 5 ladies who don't have any money and they're coming from Yemen and they've got children and they have no food and we need to get them sorted out. I think they were getting £30 a week for everything, like bottles and nappies and formula and just everything. And so we got 300 donors sign up overall from LinkedIn, and we built a platform and we started to give people money in a really safe way. And that's how the company started. And we took on some funding. We started to bring on businesses who wanted to give. We built out some reporting. And then we moved into the US market, where we ended up taking this platform that we built and licensing out to large foundations. And that's where we landed. So at the minute, we're operating in 2 states in the US. We have a remote sales team in Boston who do all of our prospecting and outreach. And we're selling this SaaS platform into large foundations to give people money. So that's kind of our story.
Okay, and how many different hubs have you got at the minute, and what's the size of your organization?
How many hubs have we got? Molly, how many hubs have we got?
How many different countries have you got an office?
Oh, right. Well, we have our little hub in Northern Ireland, and we all work remotely. So technically, there's an office in Bangor, and there's one in Rostrevor, and there's one in Belfast. We're all remote. But we do have our sales team based in Boston, and then we're actually incorporated in Colorado. So Boston, Denver, Colorado, and Belfast. But what we found is that actually the product that we had was too big for Northern Ireland. There weren't foundations within Northern Ireland who wanted to do what we wanted to do. There weren't foundations within the UK that wanted to do what we wanted to do. And so it was only when we actually went to the US, where they have huge foundations who put millions and millions, even billions, into disaster relief, crisis relief aid for people who are caught in poverty, long-term systemic poverty, even racial divide. San Francisco at the minute are giving money directly to minority communities on a monthly basis. So we're starting to see city councils take responsibility for systemic poverty, and they didn't have a system for it. And we came along and said, look, here's what we've built. We've done it through hard yards. We tried to do this ourselves based on trying to get donations in and distribute it. And it was something that solved a problem for them. But the moral of the story is, if you're starting your own business and you aren't getting a lot of traction in Northern Ireland, maybe the market's too small. And I would always encourage anyone to get out, seek validation from a much more global perspective. Quite often in Northern Ireland, we think if it doesn't work here, it won't work anywhere, and that's not necessarily true. So, yeah.
And so, kind of to wrap up, what do you see next? What do you think 2022 looks like and beyond, if you feel like it?
Well, we've just finished raising our pre-seed round. We wrapped it up, the second close in July, and we are doing more market validation work. We know the market, we know the type of foundations, and now it's really looking at the scale of this. The product's scalable, the team are really tight, and we're just saying, well, how much traction can we take on before our next round? So we'll probably be raising investment again in about 8 or 9 months, and pushing out as hard as we can across the US market. We're excited to be there. It's the right time for us to be there. There's a lot happening politically. There's big eviction crisis. People are looking for new systems. So yeah, watch this space. It's going to be an exciting year. But thank you for asking. Thank you.
No problem. And how could people find out more about it?
We have multiple social profiles. We have ESTHER Giving on Twitter. ESTHERgiving.com is our website. You can find me on LinkedIn, Carol Rossborough. Come and hunt me down, ask me questions. Yeah, I'd love to have coffee with anyone who has any ideas about starting their own business. Come and find me. So.
And Michael, have you any last comments you'd like to make just to wrap us up? No?
I'm good. Which is, thanks there.
Excellent. Well, I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.